Ever heard of a guy who went from public enemy number one to like one of the most influential figures in the spread of a new religion?
Mm-hmm.
We're about to unpack the life of just such a man, Ammar ibn al-As.
His story is fascinating,
Huh.
full of twists and turns.
We're going to use two YouTube videos from the Akin Institute to really understand Ammar's journey. But here's where it gets even more interesting.
Okay.
This deep dive isn't just about him. We're going to explore his family, too, especially his father and brother, and how they were all part of this incredible story unfolding in the early days of Islam.
Yeah. It's amazing how intertwined their lives were with the very beginnings of Islam, even when they were opposed to it.
Absolutely. Let's start with Amr's dad, Alas ibn Wail.
Okay.
This guy was a big deal in Mecca, known for his wealth, his sharp mind, and his fierce opposition to Islam.
It's a fascinating paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
His sons eventually become key figures in Islam, yet he was one of its most outspoken critics.
Talk about a family divided. Even before Islam, Elias was a complicated figure. He was known for taking advantage of people,
Yeah.
especially those who were vulnerable.
Right.
But he also played a role in establishing the Pact of Justice in pre-Islamic Mecca.
Yeah. It shows that even people who do bad things can sometimes contribute to positive change, even if unintentionally.
Right.
This Pact of Justice was a response to a pretty terrible incident involving Alias himself.
Oh, tell me more about that.
Well, a tradesman came to Mecca all the way from Yemen to sell his goods.
Okay.
Alias, being the shrewd businessman he was, took the goods but refused to pay the man.
That's awful. What happened? Did anyone stand up for this poor guy?
They did. This incident caused a huge public outcry. People were outraged that Alias could exploit someone so blatantly, especially someone from outside Mecca who didn't have tribal protection. This ultimately led to the formation of the Pact of Justice, which aimed to protect the vulnerable and ensure fair dealings in trade.
So, in a way, Alias's own actions led to a system designed to prevent those very actions.
Exactly, it's a strange twist of fate.
Yeah.
However, when Islam emerged, Al-Ayas became one of its most vocal opponents.
Okay.
He didn't resort to violence, but he used his sharp wit and sarcasm to mock the prophet and undermine his message.
So instead of swords and spears, his weapon of choice was mockery.
Precisely. And his mockery wasn't just lighthearted teasing, it was intended to publicly humiliate the prophet and discredit his message. In fact, several verses in the Quran reference Al-As's behavior and the severity of his actions.
That's really interesting. Are there any specific examples of what he did or said?
There are a few that stand out. For example, he would challenge the prophet with impossible tasks. He once asked the prophet to move mountains or to bring bones back to life, as if to say, if you're truly a prophet, then prove it.
That's pretty bold, if you ask me. Did he ever face any consequences for his actions?
According to the sources, the prophet eventually made a supplication against Al-As after enduring his constant insults. Shortly after, Al-As stepped on a thorn, which led to a severe infection and ultimately his death.
Wow. It seems like his mockery had some serious karmic repercussions.
It's certainly a story that makes you think about the consequences of one's actions and the power of words.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about Amar's brother, Hisham ibn al-As. From what I understand, he was quite a different character than his father.
He was indeed. Hisham is known for being one of the early converts to Islam, which obviously put him at odds with his father.
Can you imagine the tension in that household with the father so vehemently opposed to Islam and both his sons embracing the faith?
Yeah. It must have been incredibly difficult for Hisham.
Yeah.
The sources describe him facing severe persecution and even torture at the hands of his own father.
Wow.
He was eventually imprisoned for his beliefs.
Really?
Can you believe that? 10 years he spent in prison, simply for being a Muslim.
10 years? That's a lifetime. What kept him going through such a difficult ordeal?
His faith and the support of his fellow Muslims. There's even a verse in the Quran that was revealed specifically for Hisham and others who were forced to renounce their faith under duress.
Really? A verse just for him. What does it say?
It essentially reassures them that God's mercy is vast,
Yeah.
and that even those who have transgressed can still find forgiveness if they sincerely repent.
Right.
It's a testament to the compassion and forgiveness at the heart of Islam, even in the face of such intense persecution.
That's a powerful message of hope, especially for someone in Hisham's situation.
Yeah,
But his story doesn't end there, right? Didn't he eventually escape from prison?
he did, and it's quite a daring tale. His cousin, along with Umar ibn al-Khattab, who would later become the caliph, orchestrated this incredible rescue mission. They risked their lives to free Hisham and another Muslim who was imprisoned alongside him.
Wow, that's incredible to think that the future caliph was involved in a prison break.
Right?
It really speaks to the bond and loyalty among the early Muslims. What happened to Hisham after he escaped?
He fled to Abyssinia for a time and then later joined the Muslim community in Medina. He fought bravely in several battles, including the battles of Ajnadin and Yarmouk. His words and actions on the battlefield were said to have inspired many of his fellow soldiers.
He sounds like a true hero.
He is remembered as such.
Yeah.
But his story, unfortunately, ends in tragedy.
Oh.
He achieved martyrdom during the Battle of Yarmouk, fighting for the very faith his father so vehemently opposed.
That's heartbreaking, especially knowing that his brother, Omar, was the commander in that battle.
The sources say that Amr was deeply affected by his brother's death, but he ultimately chose to prioritize the success of the battle over retrieving his brother's body.
Wow.
It was a difficult decision, but it highlights the complexities of leadership and the sacrifices demanded in times of war.
So we have this backdrop of a family deeply divided by faith, a father consumed by his hatred for Islam, and two sons who embraced it wholeheartedly, each facing their own trials and tribulations. It's a pretty powerful setup for understanding Amar's own complex journey.
Absolutely. He inherited his father's intellect and cunning, but ultimately used those qualities for the advancement of Islam.
Yeah.
His transformation from staunch opponent to devoted champion is truly remarkable.
It's incredible to think about the paths both Amr and his brother took, especially with their father's strong opposition to Islam. But before Amr fully embraced the faith, there's this whole chapter where he was actively working against the early Muslims.
Yes, his early years were certainly marked by his cunning and strategic thinking, which he initially used to try and undermine the growing Muslim community.
It makes his eventual conversion even more dramatic. What was it like when he was trying to stifle the spread of Islam?
Well, a prime example is his diplomatic mission to Abyssinia, present-day Ethiopia. He was tasked with a very specific goal: to convince the Negus, the Christian king of Abyssinia, to extradite Muslim refugees who had fled Mecca to escape persecution.
What a high-stakes mission. How did he approach this challenge?
Knowing the importance of alliances and leverage, Amr arrived in Abyssinia bearing lavish gifts for the Negus and his advisors. He appealed to their political interests, arguing that these Muslim refugees were troublemakers who posed a potential threat to the stability of Abyssinia. He was trying to create a wedge between the Negus and the Muslims, hoping to exploit any existing tensions.
That's pretty clever. It seems like he was a master of political maneuvering.
He was indeed. However, the Negus was known for his fairness and insisted on hearing the Muslim side of the story before making any decisions.
Good for him. So who represented the Muslims in this high-stakes meeting?
None other than Jafar ibn Abi Talib, the Prophet's cousin. He delivered a powerful and eloquent speech outlining the core tenets of Islam and emphasizing the persecution they'd faced in Mecca.
I bet that must have been a powerful moment. Did Amr just sit back and let Jafar speak?
Oh, not at all. He was constantly trying to find ways to discredit the Muslims. There's a particularly dramatic moment where he tries to exploit the religious sensitivities of the time. He claims that the Muslims hold blasphemous views about Jesus and urges the Negus to question them about it, thinking this will surely turn the tide in his favor.
What a calculated move. Did it work?
It backfired spectacularly. The Negus, intrigued, asks Jafar about their beliefs concerning Jesus. Jafar, unfazed, recites verses from the Quran, beautifully articulating the Islamic perspective on Jesus as a revered prophet and messenger of God.
So not only did he defend their beliefs, but he did it using your own scripture.
Precisely. The sources describe the Negus being deeply moved by these verses, even to the point of tears. He was so impressed by the Muslims' faith and their respectful portrayal of Jesus that he not only refused Ammar's request for extradition, but also granted the Muslims his protection. Talk about a complete reversal of fortune for Ammar.
Wow, what a humiliating defeat for him. So Amr returns to Mecca empty-handed and probably feeling pretty embarrassed, right?
I'd imagine so. But here's where it gets really interesting. According to the sources, the Negus, in a private conversation with Emir, reveals his own inclination towards Islam and encourages Emir to follow the Prophet. He planted a seed of doubt in Amir's mind, a seed that would eventually blossom into full-blown conversion.
That's incredible. So Amr, who went to Abyssinia to undermine the Muslims, ends up receiving guidance from a Christian ruler who had never even met the Prophet.
It's a testament to the universal appeal of Islam's message and its ability to resonate with people from all walks of life. But Emr's journey doesn't end there. He returns to Mecca, defeated and probably grappling with conflicting thoughts and emotions.
That journey back to Mecca must have felt a lot longer than the journey there. What happened next? Did he immediately embrace Islam?
Not quite. It took some time for all of this to sink in. The events in Abyssinia, coupled with the Prophet's continued success in Medina, eventually led Amr to a life-altering decision. He decided to embrace Islam.
What a turning point. Can you imagine the weight of his past actions? He had been a fierce opponent of the Prophet and the Muslim community.
You can imagine the hesitation he must have felt. The sources describe his apprehension about approaching the Prophet burdened by the weight of his past deeds. But upon seeing Amr, the Prophet immediately welcomed him with open arms, offering forgiveness and acceptance.
Wow, that speaks volumes about the Prophet's character and the transformative power of forgiveness.
It really does. However, not everyone was so quick to accept Amr's conversion. Some people questioned his motives, wondering if it was a calculated move rather than a genuine change of heart. After all, he was known for his political maneuvering and strategic thinking.
So there was some skepticism surrounding his conversion. Did that bother him?
Perhaps, but the Prophet, known for his wisdom and insight, consistently affirmed Amr's sincerity. He even entrusted Amr with important responsibilities, appointing him as a military commander despite being a recent convert.
Talk about a vote of confidence. The Prophet must have seen something special in him. Did Amr live up to these expectations?
He did, in a big way. Amr, in turn, developed deep respect and admiration for the Prophet. He was initially quite shy and awestruck in the Prophet's presence, a stark contrast to the mocking figure he once was. His transformation was truly remarkable.
This sets the stage for Amr's transition from a cunning opponent of Islam to one of its most brilliant strategists and leaders. What were some of his key contributions to the early Muslim community?
Amr's military and political skills, honed during his years as a merchant and diplomat, flourished under the leadership of the first two caliphs, Abu Bakr and Umar. He was instrumental in the Muslim conquests, particularly in Palestine and Egypt.
I've heard about his conquest of Egypt. It's considered one of the most significant victories in early Islamic history. What made him so successful in that campaign?
Amr's conquest of Egypt is a masterclass in strategic thinking, military brilliance, and political savvy. He didn't just rely on brute force. He understood the complexities of the region and used them to his advantage.
So he was playing a much deeper game than just conquering territory.
Absolutely. At the time, Egypt was under the rule of the Byzantine Empire, but it was a tense and often oppressive relationship. The Coptic Christians, who made up a significant portion of the Egyptian population, faced considerable discrimination under Byzantine rule.
So there was already this underlying tension within Egypt itself.
Exactly. Amr recognized this and saw an opportunity. Instead of just marching into Egypt with an army, he strategically positioned his forces in Rafah, a city on the border between Palestine and Egypt. From there, he initiated communication with the Coptic leadership, appealing to their shared Abrahamic heritage and highlighting the Prophet's message of tolerance and justice. He promised them fair treatment and religious freedom under Islamic governance.
What a smart move. He was basically turning their internal divisions into his own advantage.
He was a master of such tactics. His approach worked. Many Coptic Egyptians, weary of Byzantine oppression, saw the arrival of the Muslim armies as a chance for liberation. They even provided crucial support and intelligence to Amr's forces.
That's amazing. So when he finally launched his campaign into Egypt, he had a significant portion of the population on his side.
Precisely. This internal division within Egypt was crucial to Amr's success. He secured key victories, eventually capturing the strategically vital city of Alexandria, which dealt a major blow to Byzantine power in the region.
This wasn't just a military victory, it was a triumph of strategic planning and understanding the political landscape.
Exactly. Amr's conquest of Egypt wasn't about brute force. It was about skillfully maneuvering through a complex web of political and social dynamics. He was a master of the long game, and his victory in Egypt solidified his reputation as one of the most brilliant military minds of his time.
It sounds like Amr's conquest of Egypt was as much about understanding people as it was about military strategy. Did this approach continue once he was in charge?
Yes, absolutely. Amr's leadership in Egypt went far beyond the battlefield. He's actually credited with founding Fustat, which later became Old Cairo.
Okay.
This wasn't just a strategic outpost. It was designed to be a thriving city, a center of trade and culture.
So Amr wasn't just a conqueror, he was a city builder. What was his vision for Fustat?
Amr understood that for a conquest to be truly successful, it had to be about more than just military dominance.
Right.
He needed to establish a stable and just society. He envisioned Fustat as a place where Muslims and non-Muslims could live together in harmony, each group free to practice their own faith and maintain their own customs.
That's a pretty progressive vision, especially for that time period. Did he succeed in creating this kind of society?
He laid the groundwork for it,
Yeah.
and the sources praise his just governance in Egypt. He established a fair tax system that wasn't overly burdensome on the people, regardless of their religion. He also respected the rights of non-Muslims, allowing them to maintain their own courts and legal systems for matters pertaining to their personal affairs.
So he wasn't trying to force everyone to convert to Islam or impose a strictly Islamic system of law on the entire population.
Not at all. He followed the principles of Islamic teachings regarding the treatment of non-Muslims, which emphasized tolerance and respect for other faiths.
That's important to remember, especially when we think about historical conquests. It challenges the often simplistic narrative of forced conversion and cultural erasure.
Yes, it's crucial to understand the nuances and complexities of these historical events.
Right.
Amar's governance in Egypt is a fascinating example of how Islamic principles were applied in a diverse and newly conquered land.
It's clear that Amr was incredibly successful, both as a military strategist and as a leader, but were there any challenges or setbacks he faced during his time in Egypt?
Even the most accomplished individuals face their share of trials.
Right.
The sources do mention that Amr wasn't without his struggles and regrets, especially in his later years.
What kind of struggles did he face?
As the governor of Egypt, he had to make difficult decisions, sometimes involving life and death.
Yeah.
The sources don't go into great detail, but there are accounts of him grappling with the consequences of some of his choices.
Okay.
Perhaps he made decisions that, in hindsight, he wished he could have changed.
That's a side of leadership that we don't often hear about. It humanizes these larger-than-life figures and reminds us that they too wrestled with doubts and the weight of their responsibilities.
It certainly does. One of the most poignant scenes described in the sources is Omar on his deathbed, expressing uncertainty about his fate and seeking God's forgiveness for any transgressions he may have committed.
That's a powerful image. It shows that even a man who achieved so much, a man who played such a pivotal role in the spread of Islam, still felt the need for humility and repentance at the end of his life.
It reminds us that none of us are exempt from seeking forgiveness and making amends, regardless of our accomplishments.
So what can we take away from this deep dive into the life of Amr ibn al-As?
Omar's story is an incredible testament to the human capacity for change and transformation. He went from being a fierce opponent of Islam to one of its most ardent champions. He was a brilliant strategist, a cunning diplomat, a just ruler, and ultimately a man who sought redemption. His life is a tapestry woven with threads of ambition, faith, triumph, and regret.
It's a story that reminds us that history is rarely black and white. It's full of complex characters, shifting alliances, and unexpected turns of events. And sometimes, the people who start out as your greatest opponents can become your most valuable allies.
Yeah. I'd encourage our listener to reflect on how learning about someone like Omar ibn al-As might change their perspective on the early days of Islam and the challenges faced by its followers. It's a story that reminds us of the power of forgiveness, the complexities of leadership, and the enduring legacy of those who shaped the course of history.
It's been an incredible journey exploring the life of this remarkable figure. And for our listener, if this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, I encourage you to delve deeper. Watch those Yaqeen Institute videos, explore the historical accounts, and continue to unravel the fascinating stories of those who shaped the early days of Islam. Until next time, keep diving.